Yeah, hello. Erik Wetterling here of the Hedgeless Horseman. I'm here today with Patrick Highsmith of Timberline Resources, and we're going to talk a bit about the recent news that have come out of the company, and hopefully Patrick will be able to explain some of the more in-depth geological stuff that it's hard for myself and other retail investors to really get a wrap our heads around. So thanks for coming here today, Patrick.
Hello, Horseman. It's good to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity, Eric, to join you. I call this a fireside chat we're going to have about some of the more geological aspects of exploring for Carlin type gold in Nevada. So I appreciate the opportunity. We don't normally get to share geology at this level. I appreciate your interest. So let's move along, Eric. I'm going to share my screen here, and that way we can get through some introductory materials and also give some background information to the audience. So you can see my screen, okay?
Sure can.
Okay. So first, for sure, I'll be making some forward-looking statements. I am, after all, talking about geology and exploration, and also, of course, there's technical information contained here. So by all means, I encourage the audience to visit Timberline's website and see some of the this background material here and check out the fine print as you take on board the things we're discussing today. So Eric, you know my view on looking for gold. I mean, with junior companies, this is a risky business. So you want to look for groups that are on trend, as they say. Best place to find gold is right next to where someone else has found gold. And at Timberline, we're on a world-class gold producing trend in Nevada called the Battle Mountain Eureka trend. In addition, we're doing real exploration, but we also have a resource that was reported in compliance with 43101 several years ago. We're going to go through that just briefly. It's about 650,000 ounces of gold. Most of that is oxidized material sitting near surface. But what we really like about our Eureka project is this is district scale potential. Millions of ounces here. That's what happens in Carlin type deposits when a district starts to grow. It turns not just from one mine, but into multiple mines. And that's the potential. That's the reason we're here. And when Quentin Henney and I joined the team last year at Timberline, this was the reason. And we do have a really seasoned team of explorers, and not just old guys, but old guys who are ore finders with discoveries in their history. And we believe putting a team like that together is a way to do it again. So those are sort of the
I
highlights in
mean,
my mind.
can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah, I mean, I think this sums up the investment case pretty well because, I mean, as an investor, I'm looking at this slide and looking at Timberline, and I'm thinking, okay, world-class trend. That's obviously, the Bell Mountain Eureka trend. So one knows that, okay, ounces found there should fetch a higher value, all else equal. Uh, Relative to most other areas in the world because it's close to infrastructure, it's close to a series of very large mines, it's close to the largest mining companies in the world. And then you have the fact that you already have an advanced stage project. So you have over 500,000 ounces in the ground already, and that's not obviously going anywhere. So you have that, in my opinion, margin of safety again in one of the most prolific and most crowded places basically in the world. And then you have that district scale potential, and as we're gonna, I think, find out later, there are some probable upside as well right next to the current resource. So there you have the probable upside as I see it, and the very high potential upside given that there are three multi-kilometer long gold in soil anomalies, and we know that they're gold bearing because, I mean, at least two of three trends have been actually mined back in the day. And then we have the Oswego road cut, which is superb. And lastly, of course, you have one of the most impressive exploration teams any junior has today, in my opinion. And they are also all, it's not that they're just, big names. It's just that they have the relevant Nevada Carlin gold experience. So it's basically some of the best people and this is what they were, best at. So I think it's a really unique opportunity in timberline resources, and which I have written a piece about. But yeah, I would just like to basically sum up the case as I see it for why I think timberline is one of the best risk reward plays out there, and I personally own it.
Well, thank you, Eric. I think we can stop there and wrap it up. but no, I think that's just the surface. And what we're going to offer here in this conversation is a little bit of insight into the whys about this geology. Why do things happen the way they do? Why do drill holes in the middle of a trend not hit ore grade gold, for instance? We're going to talk about that. And yet, right there, the targets are stacking up one after the other. And yet, even in the middle of a gold deposit, a drill hole can miss economic intercepts of gold. It's a tough business. And so hopefully that insight helps everybody that we're going to go through today. So thank you. That's great points. Of course, we do want to share our capital structure with the audience. We right now have about 114 million shares outstanding. As you can see there, we actually have warrants that are in the money. Some of those are being exercised now. I would refer the audience to our 10K, our recently filed financials, where you can see those details. And that includes some warrants being exercised now. Significantly, with those shares out, and I like to say 100 million is the new 30 million shares outstanding, but this is really an indication of a junior company that's been around a while, Eric, and as such has been through a real downturn. And only last year did we start to see kind of a turnaround in sentiment, and Timberline's been able to execute on that. But significant in here is this block of information. About 28% of the shares are owned at the board level by directors and management. And that shows the skin in the game at the board level, and some really quality institutional investors right behind that. Crescat Capital here in Denver owns about 15%. Condire Resources about 8%. And again, significant shareholders combined with the directors give us confidence that share float is there to stay. These are long-term investors who hold most of this stock. And of course, that gives us a market cap of a little under $30 million or so US. And of course, thinly traded, as a lot of junior companies are. We do also trade on the TSX Venture Exchange in Canada, and have a good number of Canadian shareholders and international shareholders as well. Okay, so
I mean,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Eric. There was a bit of a delay there.
No, I was, yeah, I was just gonna, basically add to the investment case as I see it. The fact that I would really want to see is the fact that there's skin in the game, and the more competent the people, the more important skin in the, or the signal value goes up, in my opinion. So when you have some of the best exploration geologists in the world when it comes to Carlin type systems, and they have a lot of skin in the game, it's okay. I see that as, who am I to argue, basically.
Yeah, it's a good way to filter the playing field when you look at the junior world. And in this case, of course, it's very interesting because as was publicized last year when Crescat Capital invested, as you know, they work very closely with Quentin Henney as a technical advisor. So really, we're not counting the Crescat holdings at the board level, even though Quentin is effectively working as a technical advisor to Crescat. And certainly that even makes that a little more close-knit family. So a good point to be made there as well. So look, let's get people oriented. We've been talking about some names of places in Nevada, and some folks may not be as familiar. Here in the upper left, you see that Nevada, really the gold trends are highlighted here. The world famous Carlin Trend, and just to the west of that, the famous Battle Mountain Eureka Trend. So here sits the Eureka, basically the town of Eureka and our Eureka project at the south end of the trend. That's where we're focused in this slide. So we're looking now in a Google Earth view to the northwest. Here sits our large Eureka project in the foreground, about 60 square kilometers there, just south of the Ruby Hill Archimedes mine that was operated by Homestake and later Barrick, now by Waterton Global. So just north of us, about 5 million ounces in total, 1.4 million ounces produced there historically. So a sizable Carlin type gold deposit in its own right. And of course, here, the town of Eureka, and through this area here was the famous Eureka district from the 1870s to 1890s that was the second most prolific producer of silver, lead, zinc mineralization in the US back in that day. So early days of mining in Eureka were about silver. And of course, more recent days have been about gold. You see the historic mines on our property. The Windfall mine here produced around 115,000 ounces of gold in the 70s and 80s at those low gold prices. And it was a heap leach operation, one of the first in Nevada. Here, at the Lookout target, the Lookout Mountain pit sits here. And at Lookout, about 18,000 ounces of gold was produced, but at a high grade, over 4 grams per ton. So 2 historic mines on our property in modern era. And by the way, littered up and down these trends are smaller historic mines that were part of the historic Eureka production. So there's a view of the trend. As you look north, of course, McEwen Mining operates here at Gold Bar. Further north is the incredible Pipeline Cortez complex operated by Nevada Gold Mines, formerly Barrick, before the joint venture merger with Newmont there. And of course, the incredible Gold Rush target, underground high-grade mineralization being developed by Nevada Gold Mines. I believe it'll come online in earnest next year. Again, multi-million ounces at multi-gram per ton underground mineralization. And a lot of analogies from these big districts to what we're doing here in Eureka. And we're going to talk about that as we go forward with the presentation.
I'm just curious, the Eureka silver mining, what kind of system was that? And I'm just curious simply because in one of your recent news releases, you do mention that you're finding a second type of mineralized system, or two different kind of mineralization. So does that have anything in common with, the old Eureka silver stuff?
Great question, Eric. In fact, that mineralization mined in the 1800s was what we call carbonate replacement deposits. So these are limestones and dolomites and such, which were replaced by mineralizing fluids from intrusive bodies, granite-like rocks that came up the structures here in this belt, and pushing off the top of those granitic rocks were fluids rich in silver, lead, zinc. And they replaced those limestones, those reactive rocks, and formed silver, lead, zinc mineralization. That happened in the Cretaceous period, well before Carlin-type mineralization that happened here at Ruby Hill and on our Eureka project. So the drilling that you mentioned was one of our deep core holes, which we're going to discuss in a little bit, that did tap into that style of mineralization. Low grade so far. The silver got quite high, up to over 80 grams per ton over a narrow width. But yes, it's indicative of probably that earlier stage of mineralization. Now that's very interesting. The great Carlin districts, such as up at Carlin proper, we do see older sort of heritage mineralization along the same trends. And this is because these features, this corridor we're looking at right here, Eric, is probably a major crustal break where the earth is effectively cracked to great depth. And multiple times over geologic history, fluids have found their way up these structures. And at the Carlin Trend, at least 3, maybe 4 ages of mineralization on the Carlin Trend. None of those lead zinc producers were prolific up there. I'm not sure any of them. There was some small production, I believe. But when we go into some of those gold mines up there, we do see an earlier age of silver, lead, zinc, base metal mineralization. So what happens is those rocks are come in first, those mineralizing systems. And in fact, some of the alteration associated with those makes for a better host rock later for the Carlin type mineralization. The introduction of things like iron and silica into the rocks can actually prepare them, maybe make them more brittle, and they shatter, they become better hosts. So we do actually see overprinting mineralization, and probably the great Carlin type districts of the world, that's one of the things you want to look for, more than one age of mineralization. So we think it's a good thing, and we believe we have tapped into the first indications in this part of the property here near Lookout of that earlier stage mineralization. Great question. So we've just zoomed in a little bit more now to a slide showing the major trends on our property. So here you see again this large land position, about 60 square kilometers, and three trends are highlighted from gold in surface sampling. This sort of heat map shows you the warm colors lighting up where we have rocks and or soils at the surface. And we've covered most of the property. We'll probably get a bit more soil coverage in over the next year or so on the project to sort of fill this map out. But what you can see is quite clear. We have the windfall trend, and actually all the way down here now, we've done a bit of mapping all the way down here. So for more than 8 kilometers of strike, we've got gold at surface, some small historic mines also, but up at the north end, the large windfall mine here, about 115,000 ounces. And those pits, of course, are on our patented claims, as a matter of fact. So there's the windfall trend. We'll talk more about that later. Of course, we talk a lot about the lookout trend. Again, more than 6 kilometers of strike length here. The lookout pit being at the center of this outline here. This is our resource area where we've reported that resource we've discussed, and we'll touch on more. And then to the north, we have Rocky Canyon and other targets continuing up this trend. And then in the middle, we have the Oswego trend here. No modern mining on it, and some small historic production, but not much. And yet right there, a favorite target that we talk about quite a bit at a place called the Oswego Road Cut. And there we have rock samples at surface of over 12 grams per ton over more than 80 meters of length. Now that's not true thickness. That's probably a fault that gold has sort of leaked up along, but it's oxidized, it's high grade, very little drilling in the area, and an exciting target between the two trends where there's been more work done. So we're going to focus in some detailed geology in this corridor here, Eric, sort of between Lookout and Oswego, with a few slides here in a moment. And then we'll finish up just discussing briefly the targets up at Windfall, because we'll be doing some work there this year as well.
I would just say that, I mean, I think this image speaks volumes. I mean, this looks like a diamond smack in the middle of one of the most contested land place there is, basically, because most of all this ground is obviously controlled by the JV between Barrick and Newmont. So I just find it a bit fascinating that there is at least one junior that has a project like this, and just for my, from perspective of an amateur, I mean, it looks like there should be a big system there, because how else do you get 3 multi-kilometer long trends like that? It's just, I just find it fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. And what does differentiate a junior like Timberline is not only is it a large land position, but it's on trend, and we know that. And there's a sizable mine just to the north of us here, as you can see at the top of the slide. And furthermore, we have gold at surface and oxide gold at surface in a resource category, and that is pretty unusual in this day and age. So it's a good observation you've made there. So, oops. There we go. So here we're just getting a view now in a photo looking to the southwest across the Lookout resource. We've outlined that in red, as you can see here. There's the Lookout pit scratched into the side of Lookout Mountain itself. You see the red color from all the oxidized iron and silica there. And mostly the resource is low-grade oxide, but that measured and indicated is about 500,000 ounces there, and it's at about 0.62 grams per ton. But it's the high-grade core of that, Eric, that's had us the most excited. And why, as you'll see, there's been so many drill holes at Lookout over the years. And here we've looked at the high grade in the pit. This year's drilling program, 2020's drill program that we've reported on continuing into 2021, focused in the pit here and in this area inside the resource coming to the north, and then a few step out holes as far as 450 meters away to the east here. And the reason for that was we understand now better the high-grade mineralization and some of the controls related to these cross structures, and also these north-south structures that come through this valley, which we'll talk about. And we're going to look at a detailed geologic cross-section through here in just a moment. And you can see the reason for the pursuit of drilling here at Lookout is to understand the high-grade potential in this resource. And sure, there'll be lower grade, hopefully oxide mineralization near surface that would come along with that. But what will drive the economics is the higher grade. And that's what has been the exciting part of our recent work.
I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Okay, here we have now an oblique view, and we're looking back to the northwest, okay, from kind of an aerial view in sort of 3 dimensions. And what we've put on this image, Erik, is some of the major faults outlined in red. Here's our resource area here, the northern part of our resource area, also outlined in red. Remember, north is this direction to the sort of upper right of the slide. We've outlined the Lookout pit here, where you see that 18,000 ounces that were produced of over 4 gram mineralization. But if you look closely in sort of, we've made the earth transparent here, you can see the several hundred drill holes that make up the Lookout trend. You can also see the concentration of them around the Lookout pit. And here's why. In this image, we've color-coded these red discs indicate drill intercepts greater than 5 grams per ton, and these sort of yellowish discs are 3 to 5 grams per ton. Those are potentially economic grades when you have those in good concentrations. And so you can see why people got excited about the Lookout pit itself. Look at all those stacked up high-grade intercepts there, and those are remaining in place beneath the historic pit. Then to the south, we have what we call South Lookout. Again, a very nice cluster of high-grade intercepts with very little drilling, testing those off to the east. And then to the north, you can't see it too well, but at at Rocky Canyon here, a few +3 and +5 gram per ton intercepts with very little work to follow up on those, and no historic mining here or here at South Lookout. So now you can see why this trend defined by the Lookout Mountain fault that runs up through here is very important. And notice there's some important crossing structures that come through here. And also out here in the valley, more structures that rip through here. But in this area, this is a timberline discovery. This is our water well zone. We've reported on that as early as 2015 and more recently this year, where we drilled a new hole 75 meters away and hit more of this mineralization. Again, more of those 5 gram per ton intercepts down there at depth. And then further east of that, those core holes I mentioned that were real exploration holes well out to the east even of that. And we're going to explain, we did not hit ore grade gold in those, but they weren't dry holes. There was gold and there was silver there. And we're going to show you sort of why those holes weren't drilled deep enough. We'll be able to show you that in cross section. So important view of the trend here. And you can see we've hatchered those areas, which will see the focus of 2021's exploration. I just want to point out this boundary is our plan of operations permit boundary with the Bureau of Land Management. It includes more than 250 permitted drill sites, Erik, across this trend here. So effectively, this gives us the license to move up and down this trend to identify the lowest hanging fruit, the most high value drill targets for us to test. And we've hatchered those areas in red. We're going to sort of explain, I think, with the next couple of slides, why we're excited about these areas. But you can see in general, they offset from the known mineralization. They very often are tied into high-grade intercepts that have had very little work done around them. Down here at South Lookout, for instance, there's been very little drilling to the east at all. And here around the water well zone, kind of a new discovery by Timberline, there's room to the north and the south and the east from water well, and tying that into the historic resource. And then here at Rocky Canyon, we think we understand that setting now better than it's ever been understood. And again, lots of work can be done there within the existing permit boundary. And then looming over here to the east is that Oswego road cut. And there's a kilometer scale bar for you. So we still have room to fit in a lot of drilling as we figure out the geology here at Oswego and get ready to drill it as well. So I think that's a good overview. Go ahead.
Yeah, I really like this slide because this again checks the box of the probable upside as I see it. Because right now, okay, you have that resource, but this slide tells me, okay, there's a relatively high probability that there will be more ounces discovered close to the existing resource. And as the ounces basically go up, I would say that it's reaching, it's getting closer and closer to critical mass, where it's, any sunk cost put into, putting up a mine here, whatever, will have better ROI. So I see it as a very, low hanging fruit, very probable way of adding ounces, first of all, but that it also will add inferred value to the current ounces, because it makes more sense to actually develop it. So I really do like the fact that Timberline has, a low-hanging fruit way of actually growing and perhaps getting closer to 1 million. And that's, the blue sky potential is, one thing, obviously, because this is just, well, not a small snapshot, but this is just part of the overall district scale land package you have, obviously. And I would also I'm just curious if you could point out basically where the very big IP anomaly that you got out of your surveys, where does that fit in here?
Yeah, that's a great reminder for me, and we'll show that in a moment, Eric. But where it sits here, we ran about 7 lines of induced polarization geophysics through here, crossing the district like so, and they extended for a few kilometers across. And what we saw was at depth and coming up into the mineral systems, both here in this area and over here, was this large IP chargeability anomaly that more or less, Eric, it occupies what we're calling this Graben zone underneath most of this drilling. It actually then gets a little bit shallower in the north here, and also here further north, okay? And then it gets a little bit deeper again, goes underneath a major structure, and then surfaces here, rises close to the surface in the Lookout resource area, and again to the west on the backside of the Lookout Mountain, where we have some targets. So it underlies basically this whole area. It's more than 2 kilometers long, Eric, like so, and about 1 kilometer wide. And I'll show you that view in cross section shortly. So it underpins a lot of the known gold system. And it's telling us that there's something down there probably rich in sulfide minerals. There's also some organic carbon moving around, which is part of a Carlin type system. And that's chargeable mineralization that we can see with this deep looking IP. So pretty exciting about the depth potential, but it also explains this shallower mineralization. So let's look at another view. Now, what we're going to do, let me just explain. I'm going to show you a cross section more or less along this gray line you see here. It's about 7 kilometers long. And this is the fruit of the labors of a new team member at Timberline named Dr. Chris Clinkscales, whom we've hired. He's a PhD structural geologist, Eric, who did his graduate school research on carbonate rocks that have been ripped apart and faulted up, which is the story of Carlin type deposits. So comes out of the oil and gas industry and brings some incredible expertise to Timberline. This is painstaking work. What we're doing is we're looking at a slice through the earth. So here's the surface of the earth. Here's the scale along the bottom. It's about 7 kilometers from west to east. We're looking north. So this is a slice through the earth. And on the right, we had the names of all these rock formations by their code. And you typically see the age indicated in that code. So C would stand for Cambrian aged rocks here, O for Ordovician, D for Devonian, and so forth. So as you know, in general, rocks begin lying flat, relatively speaking, and the oldest rocks are at the bottom. And as we rise through this rock section, the rocks will get younger. Occasionally, though, that gets messed up. These rocks get folded and faulted. And in fact, sometimes you get older rocks thrust over the top of younger rocks. And that's how screwy things can get in Nevada geology. And I just want to show you a few major characteristics. So just to get you oriented, here's that major Lookout Mountain fault. And the Lookout deposit itself sits there. And that mineralization we know as the Lookout resource sort of sits here, okay? Related again to these red lines in the rock, these are cracks. If they have arrows on them, they are faults. That means those rocks have been moving against each other, breaking up the rocks. And also they are plumbing for fluids to rise up and mineralize these rocks. As we move across here, we're going to get into the area where we drilled those deep core holes. this area around the major dugout tunnel fault here is where we have outcropping mineralization at the Oswego road cut that we've talked about. And then further over to the east, the Hoosac fault system ties into the windfall trend again. So in this 7-kilometer slice, you can actually see some of the elements of the rocks and the faults and the folds in these rocks that are indicative of our mineralization. So this view shows
from an untrained eye, this obviously look quite chaotic. You know, you have units all over the place, and you know, and different units coinciding or being proximal to other units. So it means that obviously the rock packages would have slid in some way, etc. But I mean, I don't know. Intuitively, one might think that, okay, it's, you know, it's a bad thing that it's chaotic, because I mean, I get scared just looking at this slide, because it feel, you know, how am I gonna, you know, solve this mosaic or this mosaic puzzle basically. But it is really a good thing, and it is expected for a Carlin system to be quite, you know, chaotic with a lot of faults and different kind of faults, etc. Is it not?
Look, chaos is the name of the game with these particular types of gold deposits, and the reason is, and Nevada is the best example in the world of Carlin type deposits. Sure, we see deposits around the world that we loosely call Carlin type. I was just meeting with one of the world's foremost gold experts yesterday, Rich Goldfarb, and Rich was just telling me, you know, he doesn't believe the deposits in China that are called Carlin type are true Carlin type, for instance. So we can debate about that. But the key ingredient that Nevada has is lots of structural geology, lots of faulting. So what happened first here, Erik, was that sort of in the Cretaceous times and at other periods in history, we had compressional tectonics where the rocks were smashing into each other. So that makes things like thrust faults, okay, and folding of the rocks, okay? But importantly, in Nevada, during, in particular, the Eocene, when Carlin type deposits were forming, we had extension, and that means the earth is ripping apart in this direction. And we have a tensional environment. And notice how these faults indicate sliding in this direction. That's with gravity, right? So these rocks are rotating against each other. They're called growth faults or normal faults. And that's the extension that we want to see. So when you see that, that's the earth accommodating that tension. And that probably enhanced porosity and permeability, which made it a great time for fluids to come in and form Carlin type deposits. But chaos is the name of the game. But because of that, we've got to do careful geology to locate our drilling. And there's been generations of geology done at Eureka. This map, this cross section that Chris assembled, is in fact a compendium of work that includes work as early as the 1930s, a lot of work in the 60s, and then more recently, since 2000, from several different groups, including students, U.S. Geological Survey, and predecessor companies. A lot of timberline data is indicated in here, and timberline drilling. Of course, Chris had access to that as well. So we have subsurface information here, okay, with a lot of drilling. And then away from that, not very much drilling. So we're trying to get a picture in 3 dimensions at depth of rocks we cannot see yet until we've drilled them. Now, geophysics helps, tells us about properties of the rocks. So I hope that explains a little bit about what helps build this puzzle. So let me tell you that 2 things that Chris figured out that are very important for us. And this was all in the literature. We sort of know these things, and others have studied them, but you have to kind of extrapolate them into your project area. But for instance, here you can see Cambrian aged rocks. Okay, that's this. And in fact, this unit, the Dunderberg Shale, hosts most of our mineralization at Lookout Mountain and sits on top of an important unit called the Hamburg Dolomite here. That contact comes to surface here. There's a fault cutting through it, and there's a heck of a lot of gold sitting right there. Now, remember, north and south, this trend continues. This is just one slice. And so that's a horizon that we're exploring heavily. And it continues to dip out this direction underneath younger volcanic rocks that we've highlighted here with that TR unit. Those are volcanic rocks that flowed in on top of the rocks we're trying to explore and obscured them once again, so we couldn't see what was down there. And so we know mineralization goes under it in that direction. We now know it's been chopped up with more faults, as you can see here. And there's that same unit, the Dunderberg down here, Dunderberg and Hamburg, but now it's deeper because of this fault. Had it been shallow, we would have drilled across here and we would have continued to hit it. but probably some historical explorers drilled holes, said, oops, it's not there anymore, and didn't want to drill deep. And we now knew this fault was here, and we've drilled deeper. And we hit the Dunderberg, but we didn't hit the base of the Dunderberg. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But that's one setting where there's mineralization. But look what's underneath that. These are Ordovician rocks here. Those are younger. What are they doing underneath the older Cambrian rocks? And that's because there's an important thrust fault right here. It's highlighted in blue. And this is where these rocks have been thrust over the top of these younger rocks. So that inverted column here that told us, these younger rocks are underneath these older rocks, told us that this thrust fault was there. Well, thrusting is an important part of the story in Nevada. You actually see it on the Carlin Trend. You see it up at the Cortez complex. It's a very important element to tell us that this deformation was happening, that we've got, in this case, more favorable host rocks beneath our feet than we ever thought, and a big thick section in here of sedimentary rocks, which are sort of the soup pot down there that's cooking up all these juices that form Carlin type deposits in the shallower rocks. So that's one thing we now can put our finger on, and we have a good idea from drilling where that thrust fault is, and that helps us understand these rocks and where the best targets are. The other thing Chris's careful work has reminded us of is where there are other favorable host rocks for Carlin type deposits. Note here, the Goodwin 9 Mile, OGN, is a noted host of Carlin type deposits just north of us at the Archimedes deposit where Barrick and Homestake operated. And here we see the Goodwin 9 Mile along the dugout tunnel fault. Remember that plumbing, and that's where the Oswego target sits. Here over at the Hoosac fault system, we have a favorable host rock at the Goodwin 9 Mile, but beneath it, we also have the Dunderberg and the Hamburg again up against major faults. So we can now see shallow targets, deeper targets, more shallow targets over here, as we'll talk about in a moment. So that really is the focus that we need to design future drill programs, and furthermore, to go find out where we're wrong, go do more geologic mapping and more drilling to put this picture together better. And so we'll zoom in and look at some more detail now, right? Zoom in on where the good stuff is. But I just wanted to show you the big picture view and how meticulous this work was for this section to be constructed.
I mean, this really reminds me of a classical treasure hunt, basically, because as you can see in the right side of the slide, there are multiple potential host rocks that have shown to be able to host Carlin gold style. So it's just interesting that, okay, this chaotic image, etc. I mean, from that sense, it's good because, as you said, faults provide the plumbing where the actual gold-bearing fluids can come up, and then you basically have to find the areas at depth where these favorable host rocks get cut by said fault, which brought up the fluid. So I mean, we have no idea, of course, because I mean, you literally just scratched the surface here, and you haven't really even tested the extension of lookout yet at depth, because the unit was appears to be even deeper. But it's just, in terms of potential, this slide, I think, highlights the blue sky exploration potential, and this is just around this part of the actual district, and you have all these different types of faults and host rocks, and you're obviously seeing, like at Oswego, the gold is hosted in another type of host rock than the Lookout Mountain. So that's another evidence that yes, there are different units, and we still have no real idea what's going to happen at depth, obviously. But it just, from a treasure hunt perspective, I do think this is, quite exciting, because it's like, okay, yeah, this is a real, story, and we will obviously find out more and more stuff, which, I mean, like you obviously have, because it's my impression that you've learned a lot just in the last 12 months.
That's correct, Erik. And Timberline has persisted and kept working through the downturn. And for instance, Steve Osterberg, our head of exploration and formerly the CEO of the company, Steve and I go back 25, 26 years. And so it's great to be working with him, having him lead the technical team. And for more than a year, Steve put the team together to go in and re-log historic core holes, historic cuttings from the reverse circulation drilling in the district, and to rebuild the geologic picture so that we could put something like this together that summarizes the historic work. And so that's one of the biggest changes from 12 months ago to now, is we got through those historic core holes. We really understood the known mineralization better, the setting for that. And of course, the other big change in 12 months, and the reason you see so much enthusiasm, is now here 12 months later, Timberline shareholders have 100% upside opportunity on this asset. We own 100% of this. We control 100% of this. Obviously, there's claims that are leased and there's claims that we own, but 100% of the project is to Timberline's credit right now. Whereas a year ago, in a tough market, the company was pursuing a farm-in joint venture for part of the Eureka assets, including Lookout. So at that time, sure, someone else would have been investing and spending the money, but Timberline shareholders would not have had the full upside exposure. And that joint venture fell away. They did not reach the earn-in that was required. And now 100% of the asset is back with Timberline shareholders. So that's another big change in a year, and a hell of a good motivator for explorers like us and for our shareholders. So that's a good point, actually. A year can change a lot of things. So we're just zooming in now to a more detailed view. This is a little less geological and a little bit more about where the gold is. Here you see the Lookout Mountain Fault. This is a jasperoid. Jasperoid is a kind of a geological jargon for silicified rocks. So that means silica came into those rocks. That's mostly quartz. Okay, silica is quartz, and that made the rock harder. Brought a lot of iron oxide in. It's often reddish colored in this part of the world, and it crops out of the ground at Lookout Mountain. It has gold in it at surface, and it sits on this fault. And it actually, everywhere you see that red area here, it's often following the plumbing, following these faults. You see that silicified area, and that silicified area in the Lookout Mountain region is quite often, most all the time, mineralized with gold, sometimes high grade, sometimes low grade. But so that's what that is. It kind of shows you where the deposit comes to the surface. You can also, if you look closely, see that many of the drill holes that come through this particular slice of the earth. So these drill holes that drilled into the deposit itself, you get a little bit further east here, they would have drilled into, say, the water well zone, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And then further east here, these were some of those exploration core holes that we reported late in the season that did not hit ore grade gold, but they hit some alteration and low level mineralization here. So again, there's a kilometer scale bar. It's still a decent sized chunk of the earth here. And you do reach out to the Oswego target here, which sits about in this area, associated with another major fault where we have that high grade mineralization at surface in different rocks. These, by the way, Erik, are showing you the dip of beds. So when a geologist measures the rocks, he takes a strike and dip to indicate which way do the beds of the rock dip. So you see here they're dipping west, here they're dipping east, which is why we've chased the mineralization to the east. Over here, though, again, they're dipping back to the west. So if you're not paying careful attention to that, you can be expecting one thing and get quite another, because the beds are headed in a different direction than you thought. So we've zoomed in a little bit more here on the target region, and we can see that thrust fault here that we told you. We've drilled across that thrust fault in a few areas. Good host rocks are down here, but this is pretty deep, and it's not an immediate focus for Timberline. We've got lots to do with these shallower targets right now. But you can see here we have Nevada group rocks of the Devonian age and Silurian and Ordovician age rocks, Goodwin 9 Mile again, that host gold in some places in Nevada, and we have faults cutting through that, and there is some known gold to the west of Lookout Mountain. So there's targets here as well. So when we zoom in at this area, we now have the opportunity to compare what that geophysics was telling us about the subsurface with the rock. So I'm just going to animate a little bit. And now we've brought in, again, the warmer colors are chargeable mineralization from IP. So this is geophysics that looks down. It puts electricity into the ground, and we measure the response of the rocks to that electricity. And this warm color shows us that those rocks are chargeable, meaning they probably have sulfide minerals like pyrite, which goes with the gold very often, and maybe organic carbon or graphite. that moves around in Carlin type systems. The rocks are so often black, and the reason for that is organic carbon, which can also charge with electricity and show up on this map. So notice these faults here. These are those new faults that I told you about. There's the volcanic rocks. And notice we've labeled one of them a buried normal fault. It does not come to surface because of these younger rocks. And we didn't know it was there until we started doing geophysics and drilling in this area. And we began to get an idea, okay, there's another rock, another fault, which drops down the rocks we are chasing a little bit deeper. And here's another fault again. And of course, a huge fault here that has really a couple of 1,000 meters of throw on it, Eric. So this has really screwed things up, this fault here. Okay, but notice what the IP is telling us. In the area of these big faults is the concentration of the highest chargeability. So the heart of the IP anomaly is down here quite deep. Perhaps, certainly you see it come shallower. So we do get some indication of probably pyrite, which we have drilled into in this area, and graphite as well that could explain that. But then it goes back under the thrust fault here, continues out to the west. But notice it follows the faults up. Probably those are fluids that moved up the faults that had pyrite in them. And just below the Lookout deposit, we have a nice anomaly. When the rocks are oxidized, Eric, by interaction with the atmosphere or oxidizing fluids, the pyrite oxidizes, it turns to rust, and it's no longer chargeable. Okay, so often we don't see the IP anomalies come all the way to the surface, but you can see they come close here and then go under the thrust fault again, come up probably these major faults again, and we see IP anomaly here and coming up this fault into a very little drilled area to the west of Lookout Mountain where we see a lot of potential. So when you put all these ingredients together, favorable host rocks, as we can see by these units that are highlighted here, favorable structures, which probably were the plumbing for those fluids to come up into these favorable host rocks, which are sort of the trap for the gold. And then we see a geophysical indication here, looking deeper than we have drilled by far, that there's an underlying mineralizing system here that is bringing the fluids up and could be the reason the mineral deposits are here. And of course, this could represent some of that, more of that silver, lead, zinc mineralization and or the gold mineralization. Okay, so we don't know what's down there yet. There are certainly rich, deep targets associated with these faults and this IP. And in a Carlin type district, it's not uncommon to go underground to mine high grade, but that would come later. Right now, we have some great targets along the major structures here, 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 and continuing north and south along this trend. So this is just a two-dimensional slice. Remember, the world continues kilometers to the north and south. So let me just move along a little bit because there's one last cross-sectional view and you can ask some more questions. So there sits an outline of our resource, just colored red for you there. And we've hatchered all the potential target areas, most of the potential target areas that come from an obvious examination of the geophysics and the geology, keeping in mind these host horizons that are most favored in the Eureka district here. And you can see continuation at Lookout, north and south along that trend at Lookout. The really interesting targets at depth here. This whole area would be highly prospective at depth. Goodwin 9 Mile, we know along the fault it's high grade. We don't know how rich the rocks are on either side of it yet, but we know this is a drill target here at Oswego. And then to the west, we already know there's some gold over here, and following these structures up into these favorable sedimentary rocks, again, good targets. And this is part of the reason we're exploring proximal to, close to the existing resource, and then exploring these targets really on both sides of the existing resource. And then for a few kilometers, about 6 kilometers total to the south and north from Lookout. So just one slice, but it gives you a view for where we're going to be exploring a lot in 2021 and some of the shallow targets. And then later, you'll certainly want to test some of these deeper targets here. And we know, for instance, that our drill holes have come into the Dunderberg, but they haven't really gotten to the base horizon of the Dunderberg out here.
I mean, to sum up this slide, I would basically say it looks like you could really be drilling for years to come, because there's simply that many, potential or prospective areas for, since you have so much of the, the relevant host rocks, and there are faults all over the place. And you so far, no one has really drilled any of these, targets that you're now outlining with your new structural geologist and the IP anomalies. That I mean, that's all, blue sky, is it not?
Yeah, this is exactly what you do, Eric. You do drill for years. And so the battle for a group like us is with all these targets, let's get the best stuff first. Let's get the highest value stuff first, the low hanging fruit. And that's why you see this geological work. We don't do it for fun. We really want to focus in and rate and rank these targets systematically as best we can. But I can tell you, there will be drilling for years, for decades. Just look at the Carlin Trend, look at the Cortez pipeline. I mean, we all drove over the Gold Rush deposit for years. Anybody working in that district drove over Gold Rush for years until it was put together late in the Cortez district's life. Same thing happens on the Carlin Trend today. So, but let's leave some of that drilling for the big mining company that comes here and mines the multi-million ounce deposit that Timberline finds. No doubt about that. But we need to show the breadth of targets, Eric, and this sort of multi-million ounce potential as best we can to our investors and to potential suitors or partners later. But we can deliver multi-million ounces of discovery in a finite timeline, a few seasons. A few seasons, this can all materialize. Any one drill hole, any one drill program, you're going to be learning and learning. And you should always harvest some low-hanging fruit in those drill programs. But remember, you got to remember that every now and then there's a big target down there that you probably should test. But you do that on strength, and you do that as an opportunist when you've delivered and you've shown the world that you kind of told the market what you were going to do, then you did it, then you told the market that you did it, and you build your strength and credibility that way. And that's where we're beginning to get predictive at Eureka, and I think that's a key element. But I can also predict we'll miss sometimes, and I'm pretty sure I'll be right about that there will be a hole that'll miss, but I'm pretty sure there'll be holes that'll hit it as well. So no, just show some photos to folks, and as we wrap up on Eureka here, this is what high grade mineralization looks like at depth. Okay, if it's at surface, it's often more oxidized than this. We see a lot of reddish colors from iron oxides and such, as I've said. But at depth, the highest grade mineralization we're likely to see. We've drilled into intercepts of over 100 grams per ton at Eureka here. The red you see there is a beautiful arsenic sulfide mineral called realgar. And if you see realgar in Carlin type deposits, it's almost as good as seeing gold. You generally do not see the gold in these systems, but that high arsenic mineral tends to go with high grade Carlin type mineralization. And in fact, the smaller districts in Nevada often do not show realgar and orpiment, its yellow sister mineral here, another arsenic sulfide. These things tend to go with bigger deposits, higher fluid to rock ratios that really had a lot of arsenic coming in with that gold, and that's how you form these minerals. So some beautiful examples of high grade 85 grams, 17 gram from historic intercepts drilled by, in this case, Timberline predecessor companies and some of these Timberline. So this is from our water well zone target, which we talked about as being near to the resource. I'm going to show you a close-up view of that in a moment. And on this table here, Eric, I summarize grade thickness. I'm all about grade thickness. Like drilling high grade is good, but what about the thickness times the grade? So gram meters. And one way to look at that is if we have very high grade mineralization, like one of our best holes in the district here from surface, we drilled 15 meters of 18 grams. So that's one of the highest grade thickness intercepts that we have in the district. Here too, we have almost 20 meters of 12 grams. And of course, when it gets a little narrower, but even higher grade, still good, almost 8 meters of 22 grams. Clearly, these are economic grade and thickness that we would look for. And in this year's program that we announced beginning in December, we drilled 15 meters of 10 grams, very near surface, oxidized, okay? And down here, a couple of more holes also made the cutoff in our water well zone, 7.6 meters of 4.5 grams, 6 meters of 5.2 grams. So those are nice grade thicknesses to show you that, sure, you know, a long run of low grade is also okay. We have some sort of, I think we have something like, we have a 100-meter run of do we have a 100-meter run? I think we've got about a 50-meter run of a gram, that sort of intercept. And those are great if they're near surface. So grade thickness, long, low grade is okay, but long, high grade, of course, is the best. And just to show you, this is what's driving our targeting at Lookout. Where are the high grade intercepts that sit at the core of this mineral system? And that's going to drive economics. So let's wrap up with a detailed view of the targets. And I think we've zoomed in even more now, and this will help everybody understand the geometry of the targets we'll be drilling this year in 2021. Again, we're a little bit north of the other section. We've moved up to the north a little bit here, but here sits again the Lookout deposit. There's the Lookout Mountain Fault, which we've talked a lot about. This is that jasperoid silicification that sits on the side of the mountain here and in the pit area right here. There's that big fault that we know hosts some of the mineralization cutting through it. There's the favorable formation, the Dunderberg Shale and the Hamburg Dolomite underneath it. And there's that new fault that we discovered with this year's work. So it's dashed because we don't know precisely where it is. This one, we know where it is because we've drilled the heck out of it, as you can see there. Now, interesting comments about this. This is where the resource area sits. And look at this little cluster of holes here that were drilled down about 250 meters and hit the base of the Dunderberg Formation. That is the first holes that went into the water well zone. Notice that it's out from the resource, 50 to 75 meters, and it's also good ways away from one of those core holes that we just reported from the 2020 drill program that was here, okay? Had this big fault not been here, this hole would have been deep enough to test this horizon. But here, this big fault was here, dropped it down to here. We're going to talk about what we did hit, which is quite interesting in just a moment. But this would give you, it doesn't take brain surgery, right? When you look at it in 3 dimensions, ore sits here, good intercepts sit here, and in between is a good drill target. We need to fill in this area with more drill holes, because here's one of the elements of the model I haven't talked about, Eric. When these fluids come up these structures, what happens is they eat their way into some of the rocks. And when they do that, they sometimes convert a limestone to a dolomite, like the Hamburg here. They hydrothermally alter the limestone. They add magnesium, they add iron. And when that happens, you get a collapse because this unit then takes up less volume. And so when that happens, you get a collapse along the horizon and along the faults. And some of this is what we call collapse breccia, where the rock sort of sinks into a hole that's forming underneath it. But it's forming because of hot fluids coming in and sort of eating their way into the rock. Porosity and permeability has then developed along that contact preferentially. And that's why we've highlighted, look at how attractive this target is. You have a fault here, very likely to have brought fluids in. The IP says there's fluids down here somewhere. And then we have the favorable horizon to the east of the water well zone. Again, project this to the north, project this to the south, and also to the west, getting closer to the system. Everywhere we hit this horizon, we get at least anomalous gold, if not ore grade. So we're going to be drilling this year with angled holes back in between the water well zone and the resource. We're also going to test this area between the water well zone and this fault. High probability of success there. And certainly shallow enough to be open pit mineable if we hit, but also the potential for bonanza grade mineralization that could be mined at depth from underground. And that's possible along this structure and this structure. So a real nice microcosm of where we're going to be exploring along the 6-kilometer trend here at Lookout, and shows you where some of the lower hanging fruit is, and of course where some of the big prize might be that could be high grade. So let's just talk about that core hole, because our news release disappointed a lot of folks, but we geologists weren't disappointed at all. And the reason was we now know that the Dunderberg Hamburg contact was dropped down, and this hole wasn't really deep enough. But as we started to get near the base of the Dunderberg, we drilled into some of the silicification, and when we did, we hit anomalous gold up to 200 parts per billion, 0.2 of a gram. So pretty good intercepts of gold in there. We thought, okay, we're seeing alteration. We're seeing this silicification that we like to see, brecciation that we like to see. And then near the base of the hole, very broken up, indicating we're getting near to a fault, probably this fault. And the rock was really broken up, difficult drilling. We've labeled it here as a Cretaceous intrusive. K is the symbol for a geologic time period called the Cretaceous. It's older. It's an intrusive rock. would have been related to like a granite. And in there, we see a lot of silicification and a lot of pyrite. So this could be what the IP is seeing. We think it's just probably a dike, which is a little stringer or a little finger that climbs up above the intrusive body. It's near the contact between the Dunderberg and Hamburger where we thought it would be. Probably it's coming up this fault or close to this fault in some fashion. So a lot of dashed lines and question marks. We don't know exactly what's down here, but in that unit, a pretty thick run of silver, lead, and zinc mineralization, as we discussed. So low level, not ore grade, but good stuff. And certainly telling us a story that there's a system down here. There's a Carlin type system down here as well. We see the gold and the arsenic here that's anomalous in that hole. So it's a great story. It's really geological. I understand that. But I think this gives people a view of when we start reporting drill results this year from near the water well zone, they're going to know what that means now. And they're going to be able to refer back to this section and the new sections that we provide. So kind of like lifting a veil here of secrecy of what the rocks are like down there. And we have a much better understanding. So we expect to grow. Remember, this is in the resource. This is not. And we already know this is here. So growing the resource is most easily done when you drill with tight spacing closest to the existing resource. And then the statistics from the modeling will support strong evidence that that mineralization is there, and you are able to incorporate it into your resource. So that's why what we call low-hanging fruit is usually close to the known resource.
I do like the sound of high probability drilling.
Yes, we all do. We all do. And not everybody gets to drill in an area that has 5 gram per ton mineralization and higher near to an existing resource. So that's a great thing for us. So just about done here. I want to show one more pretty picture from Eureka before we part ways. But here's that geophysical survey I told you about. Back in the day, Eric, we knew there was something out here. And people ask, why did you drill those core holes way out there to the east? Those exploration holes. It was one old line of IP out here, and it wasn't designed to look deep. It wasn't as high quality as the modern data. And that old line, I think it was more than 20 years old, said there's some chargeable rocks down there. You should go east and drill. And so Quentin and I, being big explorers, we came into Timberline pretty late in this design of this drill program. But we said, absolutely, let's do some exploration. And there you see the lookout pit here, and you can see those lines. And actually, you can see our beautiful haul road that drives into the lookout pit area. So we have beautiful road access to this area. There's Windfall. We only ran one line at Windfall. So this survey was really to test lookout in 3 dimensions and give us an idea if the method was helpful at Windfall. And we reported that it was a great survey, very successful. And here's a 3-dimensional oblique view looking north. So here's a block model of the resource. Okay, the higher grade blocks are green, yellow, red, orange, okay, that you can see up here. And a couple kilometers long of the resource here. And the drilling, just the 2020 drilling and the water well zone holes. So again, down in this area, the water well zone was identified in 2015, and we drilled another hole into it here. Notice that this is these red blobs are the most chargeable, the highest magnitude anomaly. So we really clipped it off. You can't see the lower level anomaly that underlies all this area because we wanted to focus on the most chargeable rocks. Here's this big blob here. It's about 2 kilometers long. And there's a kind of one of those lobes that climbed up that fault. So the IP gets closer to surface here. Another IP anomaly to the north sits likely down dip from the Rocky Canyon target, which we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, but we'll worry about that later. And then down here, another lobe that comes a little closer to the surface, and then a saddle. These core holes were not drilled deep enough to fully test this anomaly, but as we said, we found pyrite, we found graphite, we found a lot of brecciation in those rocks that is supportive of being in the halo of the IP anomaly. So this is waiting for us down there, probably related to some of these faults we've illustrated for you in cross section. And again, notice here and to the west side of Lookout, that chargeability anomaly comes up close to surface again. Where the resource sits, most of that is oxidized, and that doesn't show up well in IP again. So we get these teasers that come up around the system, but the big anomalies telling us, hosted by these big structures out here, is a system that would have injected quite a lot of pyrite at least, and maybe some graphite, move that around in the section. And that's what the geophysics was telling us about. So We announced this, I think, in February, and we were quite excited to see the data. And what this tells us is this technique was working for us. We're going to fill in a little bit more to the north and maybe to the south. You can see there's anomalies to the south here that we haven't tested it at all yet. And of course, the trend continues for a total of 6 kilometers, much bigger than the field of view here of these data. So pretty exciting stuff. Yeah, and again, that one line at Windfall was successful in showing us an anomaly there too.
I mean, lots more to explore basically. And as you said, I mean, these survey lines, they don't even cover all the snippets of the new anomalies that you're picking up here to the south, for example. So who knows what, might be beyond that. But I mean, that's for a future day, obviously. It's no, I mean, you can't drill everything at at the same time. But now it's just one of those things that I really do want to see a long runway for growth in a junior, because I mean, regardless of how long the gold bull market keeps going, etc., I would prefer to own the companies that can have a pretty good, shot at growing all through the bull market, basically. So if the bull market tops in 5 years, and Timberline, for example, has been able to grow for 5 years, I mean, the final payday is obviously, could be pretty big. Yeah, and that's one of the things I like. And obviously, since it is in a well-established tier 1 jurisdiction from a geopolitical sense, and also from a mining sense, since it's in the heart of the US largest gold camp. So no, I just think there's a lot of things going for Timberline. And I would also like to hear you just talk about your background and the background of your team, because I do think it is in my opinion, a very big selling point, the people involved with Timberline.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for those comments. Let's do this. Let me make a wrap up comment about these technologies, and I want a kind of a caution, and then we'll touch on Windfall briefly, and then we will definitely close with a kind of a rehash of the team, because I think that's important. A good point. So let me just say about the geophysics. Geophysics is a tool. And your audience who follows you because of your insightful and detailed writings, and even coming from a non-scientist, I think your analysis is excellent. The reason you apply these tools is we can't see 300 meters, 1,000 meters down below the surface, and yet we certainly can mine and drill to those depths. And so one wants to have weights of evidence before we do something expensive like drill. But secondly, the geophysics is telling us about a process that was at work and the properties in the rocks that result from that. So it's one piece of the story, but you can see how much more powerful the IP gets when you overlay it with the geology. And I should point out that Chris drew that cross section that we've been looking at before he saw the geophysics. Then we brought in the geophysics and sort of used it to help refine that view. And our geophysicist, of course, loves having tools like that. So now we've given him better geology. And our geophysicist, Jim Wright, worked on the Carlin Trend for many years. He knows how to look for these deposits. And now he'll be even more revved up because we have even better geological detail. So that's all part of both integrating technology with team. And I just want to point out, these things don't mean there's an ore deposit down there. What they mean is there's a property that we really like to see. And if we stack other weights of evidence up, sure, there'll be a reason to drill a deep hole. I mean, Quentin and I would go drill a deep hole right now. We've just discussed that. But we've got to focus on the low-hanging fruit first, always remembering what drives the wealth creation in our business is discovery, and getting the best probability of success means starting with the lowest hanging fruit and the best targets, like you see here at the Windfall, at the water well zone going north and south. So I've already just had a premonition that we're going to talk about Windfall briefly there by my slip of the tongue. So let's close with a couple slides on Windfall. We're just looking now. We've shifted a few kilometers to the northeast. Here's the road coming in from Eureka. Beautiful haul road built in the 1980s, double width rock base, all season, would cost millions of dollars to build today. Fortunately, we don't have to. And here sits the Windfall pits. from which about 115,000 ounces were extracted. The reason you see all those dots is our database actually includes blast holes in the pit as well as exploration holes. And these highlighted are intercepts between the pits or even under the pits that are left in place. And you can see we have great grade. We have 24 meters of 3 grams, which includes 6 meters of almost 9 grams, 27 meters of 2.2, including 13 meters of over 3. That's between these two pits, on trend, on patented claims that Timberline controls. So low-hanging fruit again. Now, Windfall was an interesting deposit. The rocks were literally so sanded from the alteration. This was really where the term sanded dolomite was invented. It's an alteration term when the rock's been so altered to dolomite that all that's left are sort of grains of sand when you hold it and it just crumbles in your hand, which makes for great mining and great processing, by the way. So even with that old technology, these heap leaches here apparently worked quite well, and they made a nice little economics of this operation. Obviously, that doesn't imply we're guaranteed to have the same, but it's a good place to start. So we sit here with this north-south trend again. You're familiar with that sort of orientation. We've hit on it a few times, and the drill holes here that got us interested. So at this time, this northern area is about 2.7 kilometers where we know we've got the gold on this contact. Our geologists have extended it all the way down more than 8 kilometers to the south, where the same rocks continue on the structural trend with various gold levels of gold showings. So in cross-section view, so we're going to look at a cross-section right here between the pits. So this has not been mined. And there you see, again, we have some younger volcanics sitting there, so it's not quite as obvious coming to the surface. But there's the Hamburg and the Dunderberg, and they're dipping to the east, just like the analogy to what we see at Lookout. Here you see a summary both of surface samples and some drill intercepts. I think the highs are something like 13 grams per ton in the pits at surface. A lot of samples above 3 grams per ton, a lot of samples above 1 gram per ton oxidized. So certainly those could be potentially economic grades. And then the drilling, we've already talked about some of those strong intercepts there of 2 and 3 grams, 8 grams over decent widths. But there's the scenario. Notice, Eric, a lot of the historic drilling was vertical holes. These were low cost. Sometimes they were conventional rotary, which just blows the cuttings up the outside of the hole, not very reliable. Reverse circulation, also lower cost, brings the cuttings up inside the drill steel. A little bit better quality, but back in the day, again, serious problems with reliability of RC and serious problems with the geological record that you get. And so not knowing that things were dipping, there were faults in here, or not caring, these were often quick and dirty vertical holes, usually too shallow, and very often they did not appreciate the true thickness of what was down there. And here one of the holes drilled by Timberline and our predecessor companies yielded 24 meters of 3 grams, sitting right on trend where you'd expect it. Much better results than the vertical holes were returning from that historical data. Typically, when you look at these old holes, 70s or 80s vintage, you'll see spotty anomalies, but you don't see continuous mineralization, probably due to low quality sampling. And what we need to do here is more angled holes and more core drilling. And in a terrible year for the gold industry, it's harder to raise money to do more core drilling. And so Timberline hasn't done enough of it. And with our reinvigorated company and team and strengths, we expect to see a higher percentage of our drilling going forward being core drilling. And we do expect to drill probably around 70 or 80% more drilling than we did in 2020. And we put that in a news release last week. And so folks can read up on our plans. And we expect Windfall to be part of those drilling plans, even though none of these intercepts are included in our resource. These are regarded as historical drill intercepts. While we see decent quality work and likely reliable data, particularly from the older Timberline work and Staccato Gold work, that was post 43101, so that's been good quality work. None of this is in a resource, and we regard these as historic intercepts, some of which can't be relied upon, but they sure are telling us about great geology and great low-hanging fruit in the Windfall trend. So I guess it's a good time to wrap up and talk about in closing a little bit, just a reminder about the team. I've dropped a few names along the way, and I just want to say that an incredible team, a board of directors with couple of hundred man years of experience, literally. Dave Mathewson is actually moving from the board to the technical advisory board. Our AGM is April 14, and we proposed that to the shareholders to downsize the board a little bit, but Dave stays involved. And Dave is one of the most prolific Carlin type discoverers in Nevada. He was at Newmont before I was at Newmont. He was there for many years, and gets a lot of the credit for millions of ounces of discovery in the Rain District on the south end of the Carlin Trend. Interestingly, Rain District, very similar in size to the Eureka project. So that's about the scale, and that's about, I think it's up to about 6 million ounces there in the Rain District. And a lot of that came from Dave Mathewson's work. Paul Dirksen, again, senior Nevada geologist, worked with John Livermore, who was the discoverer of the Carlin Trend. So again, a long track record, big picture guy, and Paul's been with the company almost since its founding. So he's also going on to the technical advisory board, and we thank him for all the years of building what Timberline is. And these folks are sitting in on the technical reviews with, for instance, Chris Clinkscales, who just joined the team. Chris is in his 30s, has a PhD, and has a number of years of experience, but mostly oil and gas. But you get the interaction of a guy like that, Chris, with newest technology but relatively newer to mineral deposits, with those guys with 50 years of experience like Dave and Paul. So that's been amazing. And then also we've got, of course, Steve Osterberg, who directs our exploration and was CEO of the company and has been with the company since about 2012, I think. So Steve's another PhD geologist. We worked together at BHP in the 90s. Very seasoned on multiple types of mineral deposits, very meticulous, and now able to focus full time with running the technical team, which is huge. So Steve and I are happily partnering on that side of things. And then Quentin Henney, I can't say enough about Quentin. I've known Quentin for about 20 years. We overlapped at Newmont back in the day, and a brilliant PhD explorer, visionary, really, with the passion for exploring. And with Quentin's direction last year, when we began looking at Timberline, he and I together, I sort of said, Quentin, have you looked at Timberline in a while? And he knew and liked the geology, but the land position hadn't been consolidated, and we didn't have this cohesive block that we have now. And when we looked at it again and we saw things really hanging together, and the work that Steve had done to advance the geological knowledge, it really made sense to help this company and to come in. And Quentin joined the board, and Crescat Capital, of course, participated in a big way in a financing last year. And so we both are the latest additions to the team now with Chris on the geological team. And then we shouldn't leave out other long-known Nevada names like Don McDowell, prospector, major shareholder, generated a lot of the properties that are in Timberline's portfolio, been around a lot of discoveries, long time with Santa Fe and others. And Don's, again, a big shareholder. And then really the biggest shareholder and another geologist and also financier and former broker is Bill Matlack. Bill sits kind of behind the scenes a little bit more, but also a geologist and also worked at Santa Fe and on drill outs of major gold deposits. But being on the capital markets side, Bill was an important lifeline for Timberline during those tough years. And that's how a big chunk of shares sits on that board is Bill stepped up, financed the company, and has supported the company and been, again, a technical contributor, has been through a lot of drill outs, and of course was also instrumental at the when Fire Creek, who had Fire Creek? Klondex. Forgot there for a minute. Bill was the CEO at Klondex when that transaction happened and that company got sold. So a lot of Nevada experience there. And then our chairman, Lee Freeman, again, more than 40 years experience in the mining business, geophysicist by training. And Lee is a strategist and a visionary and really kind of an expert on management and leadership, and a good mentor for me in my career for the last 20 years, and good to be working with him as our chairman. So probably more than you needed to know, but it's a team that it takes a while to talk about. And hopefully enough of that makes the final cut that folks can learn about our team a little bit more than they might see from the words on a page. So.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's almost ridiculous the amount of brain power that's in one small junior. So no, I just think that again highlights why I really like Timberline, because if I'm just gonna wrap up this main selling points as I see it again is that it's a tier one jurisdiction and in a tier one location, and as you just mentioned with the Hall Road, that alone is worth a few $1 million. And since the market cap and the enterprise value is so low, I mean that actually becomes a material piece of the intrinsic value for a good reason. And then the margin of safety again is like you have over 500,000 ounces near surface, low hanging fruit, not only at Lookout Mountain, you have it at Windfall, you have the Oswego road cut, which was exceptional. So, I mean, there's just so much smoke everywhere. And as you talked about, you at Windfall, you tracked it for 8 kilometers. I mean, what are the odds of you not finding any more gold? I mean, it's almost, ridiculously low. So I see that this case as a high probability of further growth. And of course, when you combine all that's known right now, you have a very convincing blue sky case. And then you top it off with one of the most insane Nevada experienced teams that I know of, and you have very large amount of skin in the game on top of it all. So I do think Timberline has a unique value proposition because there are not that many juniors that I think ticks all of those boxes. I mean, there's probably a handful perhaps that I know of. And that's simply why I do like Timberline and was happy to have you on as a sponsor, because this is really a name I feel I'm very comfortable standing behind. And I do think this treasure hunt that we are on, I do find it very, convincing also from I don't know, curiosity standpoint, because I mean, as I think we've talked about it, I mean, exploration is a process. It's not that you just go ahead and expect to hit on every drill hole, etc. And the work that looks boring, like deep core holes that missed, etc. I mean, that's a feedback loop that feeds into the amount of information you have, and then you have the kind of caliber guys that you have on board going through all that. And now we brought in a structural geologist, and it all seems to be lining up with the anomaly and what he interpreted the fault structures to look like, etc. So I don't know, I just think again it's like everyone has to make their own decision, but in my opinion, I think Timberline is one of the few no-brainers around. And I mean, again, it doesn't hurt that it is in a place where mining is king basically. So I don't want to wake up and be afraid that someone has confiscated the project. And I assume we will see more of that the more chaotic the world gets. And I think that's, yeah, I think to sum up, I do think Timberline is underappreciated for now, but given that you will be even more aggressive in this year 2021, coupled with the fact that you now have outlined and have a pretty good sense of where the low hanging fruit is, I think 2021 is going to be a lot better than 2020, and that's also why I have actually recently been buying more shares.
Well, thank you, Erik. It's a great opportunity to chat like this and to have somebody who appreciates the technical and the sort of storytelling behind the results and the effort. And appreciating the effort is a big part of exploration. And discoverers like the guys on our team, we know how to persist and we know how to sink our teeth into the good ones. And really, we think here at Eureka, we have one of the leading Carlin type gold projects in Nevada, which by definition makes it one of the best in the world. And we're excited to be part of that. And I hope that your audience can appreciate what goes into our decision making a little bit. And it is neither low risk nor inexpensive to do what we're doing. but the fruits that are born from these efforts have shown themselves up and down the trends of Nevada, not just one mine, but multiple mines. There's oxide low grade potential here, which can be put into production for lower capex potentially. And there's also the big stuff, big deposits that while they could be refractory and require more processing, they have the grade to support that. And they have the potential to be prolific, generation scale producers. And this is what the world needs when we look at opportunities for gold. Because when the rest of the economy gets shaky and we see money printing and we know gold is a real store of value, we want to be mining money for decades and not just trying to put a little scratchy, small open pit into production for a couple of years. And that's why we're here on the Battle Mountain Eureka trend in one of the top mining jurisdictions in the world. And that's why this team has gelled around this opportunity. So great to have you on board, and I hope we get some good content here, and that raises a lot of questions. And you can write about it, and we can talk about it, and look forward to hearing from folks who may have questions after this. So thank you very much, and thanks for that brilliant summation there that you did, and continued good luck with your work and your investing.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for taking the time to explain a bit. I mean, I certainly learned a lot, and I mean that's also one. I mean, it might be a small detail to some, but just to be able to pick up some of the geological knowledge from from you, I take that, I put that in my toolbox, so I have a better idea in the future of how I examine Carlin type systems, and just simply how exploration works. So I think it's for people who are curious about, again, how exploration works, especially in a Carlin type setting. I think this presentation really provided a lot of value. So again, big thank you for taking the time and explain all this.
Okay, well, let's sign off, and thanks again. We'll see you on the pages of thehedgelesshorseman.com, and hopefully there'll be a lot of news, and people can keep track of Timberline through what we think will be the best year in our history. So thanks very much.